Hey, welcome to Holy Smokes Barbecue. I'm Zach Bauer, and today we're going to give you our tips and tricks to trimming a brisket. If you like this video, please hit a thumbs up down below, subscribe, and you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Let's get trimming. Let's get started today on our tips and tricks for trimming a brisket. You see, brisket, I think, is probably, in my opinion, one of the most intimidating pieces of meat to prep and cook. I remember my very first one, I was crazy nervous. In fact, I think I watched hundreds of hours of YouTube videos, watching and learning, until I finally got one. I didn't understand how to approach it or what to do. I mean, for us, it's an expensive piece of meat. I mean, this brisket right here is about 18 and a half pounds, and it's about $73. And so this isn't something you just want to try out and mess up. You really want to do it well. And so today, what I want to do is I want to help you calm your nerves a little bit and help share with you really 5 tips that we use to trimming a brisket. Tip number 1 is this. Purchase a packer brisket. This is a packer brisket. It's a big piece of meat. You're gonna see that it has fat on one side. You'll notice quickly that on one side is a much thinner piece, and on the other side is gonna be a pretty thick chunk on one side here. You see, brisket is the shoulder piece. It's the piece of the cow that works a lot. It's a tough muscle. It's a big muscle. There's actually a couple different muscles that cross paths on this brisket. It has 2 parts to this brisket that I want to share with you. First one is this, is the flat. This is the piece right here that you'll see is this flat, thinner piece up front here. This is really leaner, it has less fat, it can tend to dry out quicker, it doesn't have as much muscular and fat structure through the center of it, and so this is the thinner piece. It's called the flat. The other side here is called the point, right here. This big piece here is really 2 muscles on top. It goes across the top here underneath the flat. The point here has much more marbling and much more fat. So this tends to be the piece that is can handle more heat. It can handle more of the direct pressure of smoke because it's going to dry out the least quickest. And so you're going to notice as you cook this, I tend to put the point towards my heat side. I cook on an offset smoker, and so I tend to allow the smoke, the hotter side, to hit this because it can handle and take more of the heat, and it's going to be the one that's going to maybe take longer to break down. So you have 2 pieces here. You have the flat and you have the point. If you can, try to purchase a full packer brisket. Some stores sell just the flat, and it's not bad to try out, but cooking a full packer is really a full experience. It's the part that you get to try a couple different styles of meat, a couple different styles of cuts here, and so if you can, find a full packer brisket. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is this. The colder, the better, okay? So here's what I highly recommend. Trimming a brisket is gonna take a lot of work. And so here's my tip for you, is stick the brisket in your freezer about 30 to 45 minutes before you trim it to allow the meat to get cold, tighten up a little bit, because you're gonna find that trimming it is a lot easier. In fact, the warmer this gets, the fat gets stickier and harder to handle. It actually kind of turns more into a jelly-like substance. And so when you're taking a knife and you're trying to trim it, it's difficult to do that. And so the colder you get the brisket, the better luck you're gonna have cutting, the better you're gonna have cutting through the pieces here and trimming this off. And so recommend throwing this in the freezer anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour right before you trim it. It'll allow you to cut this thing so much easier. Number 3, okay? Tip number 3, use a sharp boning knife, okay? This is the knife I use. It's a 6-inch boning knife. You can get a 6-inch, 8-inch, even a fish fillet knife is pretty decent. Something that's narrow, that's sharp, easy to handle, is gonna allow you to cut and trim this brisket so much easier. You're gonna find here in just a moment, as you're digging into this and cutting out, you need something that you can maneuver and cut around around to cut out the fat. And so the sharper the better, the easier to handle is going to help you and allow you to trim a lot easier than using a steak knife or a big chef's knife. This is going to help you. You can buy these super easy, super cheap. I'll throw the link down in the show notes. I think I got mine on Amazon for $6 or $7. Buy a couple of these. If you drop it, it's no biggie. Just buy another one, and they're great to have for trimming. Number 4. All right. Trim the hard and thick chunks of fat. So let's dig into this here. We're going to open this up here. And as you trim this thing, you're going to want to be careful as you open this thing up to make sure that you don't drip any of the juices. And so what I try to do here is open this thing up, pull out a chunk here, and do your best to try to pull the bottom piece out here. Find yourself a cutting board. I highly recommend these disposable cutting boards. They allow you to just rip up, throw away, no need to clean, no need to try to sanitize those boards. But remove it, grab a paper towel, and just pat it dry, okay? Just gonna kind of remove some of the juices that kind of collected, the pool that had kind of pooled inside the packaging. Pat it dry, and then toss it away. All right, as you look at this brisket here, you're gonna notice that there tends to be chunks of fat here. You can just remove it, toss it away. What I like to do is kind of come across this very top piece. So you're gonna notice on these briskets, you're gonna have a top, and then you're gonna have the bottom, which is the fat cap. You notice that full fat layer here. This is the fat cap bottom. And so when you grab the top up here, you just wanna kind of clean up some of this extra fat. Now, if you're in competition, you're gonna probably spend a lot more time trimming all this up. I know when we do competitions, we spend a lot of extra time just trying to clean up some of the extra silver skin, some of the extra fat on top here. If you're cooking at home, cooking for friends, just clean up as much as you don't want to eat on it. The things that you don't want to eat, trim off. It's kind of a good rule of thumb that if you don't want to eat it after it's cooked, trim it off. And so just kind of work your way through here and remove as much as you want here. All right, this is gonna be good enough for me, just kind of a front here. I might come back later and trim off some of this, but you'll notice here, as you kind of look around the edge here, you're gonna see there's gonna be some hard edge fat here, and then this piece here. This whole solid piece is a hard, big chunk of fat. And so you wanna remove that because this piece will not render down. So you just take your knife and just kind of work your way. I kind of consider it whittling it down. Just kind of grab a chunk and just kind of start removing this hard piece here. So just begin to cut out and just go until you see meat. All right, you can kind of see here, you're gonna notice here as this flat kind of connects up here with the point, there's gonna be a fat seam here then running here. You can take out some of this, but I wouldn't go down too much because you're gonna end up separating that after you cut it and cook it. And so don't worry about trying to get all the fat out of the seam. Just do your best to kind of get some of the hard stuff right up top here. And don't worry if you end up taking some meat. You can see there I kind of took a little too much. Just kind of work your way, take your time. There's no rush. Just kind of work your way through all this hard white stuff. Just begin to kind of cut out and remove the best that you can here, and that's all you need to do. All right, I'm gonna call that good enough. Trim off this little piece there, otherwise it'll burn. All right, the next piece here is you can kind of see this little hard edge here, and so I'm just gonna kind of remove off that little edge piece. Because it's hard fat, it's not going to break down, and any of the little extra pieces there will just burn. There you go. See? All right. All right, so that's the top piece here. We're just gonna flip it over now and work on the fat cap side. Okay, so this big point up here, I like to trim off this little nub here because for one thing, it's just gonna dry up and burn. And so I like to try to create in my smoker kind of an aerodynamic brisket. And so I'll try to trim off some of this extra flaps here just to keep it kind of smooth. All right, so on the back here, you're gonna notice the point is gonna have this kind of big bulge and then the flat down here. What I like to do, and this is my preference here, is I trim off more fat on the point and leave about 1/4 inch of fat down here. One, the flat is gonna need a little extra barrier protection to keep it from getting super dry. The point has a ton of fat feeding all the way through it, and so it doesn't need as much protection as the flat does. And so I'm just gonna kind of slowly start to kind of remove some of this fat cap here, just till I start to kind of see some meat. You can kind of start seeing it darker as it kind of comes through here. You might not see it on the camera here, but you can kind of see a little piece here. It kind of begins to poke through here. And so just kind of take your time just like you did in the beginning and work your way through it. Now you can see why it's nice to have this thing be colder, because as you grab it, it's a little bit taut, tough, and you can easily kind of work your knife. The more it gets warmed up, the more you're gonna see this kind of begin to get kind of jelly-like, and it makes it a little bit tougher to trim. You can still do it, but the chances of slicing a finger is a bit higher. So all right, this is starting to look good up here on the point here. Just gonna take off a little bit more here. Work my way down. I tend to find just kind of go with the meat. If it wants to lay a certain way, let it lay a certain way. I'll show you another little trick here of trimming. If you can try to kind of grab a bit and then get your knife underneath it and begin to cut away, that helps kind of pull up on the fat as you trim it. All right, you can kind of see up here it's starting to look a little bit better here. This is another kind of technique that I like. You just kind of put your hand underneath it like you're holding a pie, and you kind of work your knife across here. That's another little technique if you like it. Now it's a little tougher when it's a bit heavier brisket, which this is about 18.5 pounds, so it's a decent sized brisket here. Just kind of work your knife, get a little flap, and then just kind of pull up and start to kind of saw your way through here. Again, this is where it's helpful to have a sharp knife. You can kind of see here I'm doing my best, and I'm still hitting a little bit of pockets of meat, so just kind of work your way up and kind of pull back and start over again. Up here isn't as thick a fat, so just kind of don't take as much off up top here. All right, you can kind of start to see I've hacked a little bit too close to some of these spots here, but you can see how it's starting to come along here. Just gonna get a couple more little layers of fat here. Alrighty. You can see kind of the back here. Flip it over. The only other last part you can trim up here, flip this around, is this little pocket and this little seam here. I just kind of take a little bit of a notch out and call it good. All right, you can kind of see a little bit of divot there. That'll allow us to get some seasoning in there. And then that should be ready to go. Take a little bit more out of here. Look at this, you can see it up here. Nice and trimmed, ready to go. All right, one last tip here as we end this video here. When the brisket gets put on the grill and it begins to smoke, you're gonna develop some bark, and when it finishes up, it's going to be hard to kind of notice where the grains are on the brisket. And so when you get ready to cut and serve a brisket, you always want to cut against the grain. And so you can see in this, the grain is going this way. And so once bark develops and smoke hits it, it sometimes is difficult to know exactly where the grain is. And so what I like to do every single time to remind myself to know where it is to notch the end here. And so you can see the grain is kind of coming down like this. And so what I do is I just take a little bit of a chunk off here. You're not going to miss it. You have a ton of meat. Take off a little chunk here. And now you can see a little notch here at the end to allow you to know this is the way you're going to slice it all the way through. So these are our 5 tips. I hope they help. Don't get nervous. Buy a brisket. Try it out. Take your time cutting it, trimming it, peeling back the fat. Don't worry if you cut a little too close. Just kind of pull back, keep going. Don't be afraid. Don't be anxious. Do not be intimidated by brisket. It's a great piece. You'll learn and you'll love it. So get out and cook, and let's get smoking.